The minimum radius turn. This video covers the minimum radius turn from the number 5 lead solo perspective. Briefing. This maneuver starts after both solo pilots clear the showbox following the Fortis, number 5 flying away from the crowd to the left, and number 6 flying behind the crowd. At 5 miles behind crowd left, 400 knots and above 900 feet, number 5 will initiate a radio call that they are turning in to set up the approach for the maneuver, calling their turn towards center point. As they head towards the showbox, number 5 will fly a consistent 350 knots while trying to drop down to 300 feet and get on showline. They will be calling their speeds and distances at every mile to ensure that number 6 has a good profile set up for the rejoin. Approaching center point, number 5 will light the afterburners and pitch into a 360-degree flat turn at the maximum performance of the F/A-18C Hornet, making a minimum radius turn.
Flight control.
Approaching center point again, number 5 will pull past center point, away from the crowd, and begin a max performance climb, pushing the nose over to level flight to display the Hornet's turbo nose-low capabilities. Once number 6 has joined up on their left, number 5 will take the flight behind the crowd to set up the opposing minimum radius turn. There's a lot to think about, as well as a lot of G's to pull as the lead solo in the MRT, so let's get started. Walkthrough. Welcome back to the cockpit of the F/A-18C Hornet. You've just cleared from the Fortis, and we're now behind crowd, on crowd heading, 2.4 miles away from center point at 400 knots, 900 feet, setting up for the minimum radius turn. The minimum radius turn is the first of the maneuvers where we have a 90-degree setup from Brother Leb, who's behind crowd. This means we need to adjust our timing a little bit to give him more time to get on heading and on speed behind the crowd so he can line up his hit with ours. Which means instead of turning in at 4 miles, we're turning in at 5 miles. But because 5 miles is the outer bounds of the showbox, that's the furthest we can go away from center point. So in order to accomplish this, we actually need to start our turn-in at 4.5 miles, but all of our calls will be for a 5-mile turn-in. This means that when we reach 4.5 miles, we're going to make the radio call to Brother Leb, chariot circling 5 miles for the MRT. This tells Brother Leb that I'm starting my turn back towards center point, but I have yet to commit to the maneuver, so it gives him a little bit of time to set up his commitment as well behind crowd. Once we feel like we're perpendicular to crowd and we've got a good turn-in angle, at that point we're going to call chariot turning in 5 miles for the MRT, at which point we're committed and we're going to be setting up the profile for the MRT. We'll talk about that once we get there, but let's unpause and see how we do. On heading on speed. A little low. Just going to pitch the nose up just a little bit, make sure we don't get below that 900 feet. We're not turning in 4 miles. We're making the call at 4.5, so here we go. Chariot circling behind the crowd at 5 miles for the MRT. Now at this point, I'm going to start looking for center point. So We look up over here. Center point is just behind our right shoulder. And so at this point, I'm looking to arc at the maximum of 5 miles and looking for a good turn-in trajectory before I make my radio call back to Leb that we're turning in. So here we go. And Cherry's turning in 5 miles for the MRT. Now at this point, we're turning in, bringing the runway into the HUD, and right about here, we are going to start our setup for the MRT. Now what does our setup for the MRT look like? Well, the profile that we're trying to hit for the MRT is 350 knots at 300 feet on show line, crowd left. And we're trying to hold 350 knots all the way in because Brother has to make a very challenging timing work to make the picture look right for the clear that comes after the MRT. So at this point, we are now kind of taking the role that Brother Leb took for most of the other maneuvers, where he has to hit that 400 knot mark and try and be as precise as possible. So now we're trying to do that, 350 knots, as precise as possible, while trying to ease our way down to 300 feet and get on show line. So, let's see how we do. 4 miles, Mark 350. Telling Brother Leb our distance and speed. At this point, if we were a little offline, I'd give him a working an angle call. 3 miles, Mark 351. Easing our way down to 300 feet. A little slow. 2 miles, Mark 349. At this point, I make a sugar call to Brother Leb at 1.5 miles, reminding him what maneuver we're doing. This is one of the things that's left over from back when we were learning these maneuvers, but I think it's a good reminder to both of us of what we're doing. And additionally, when I reach 1.5 miles and I make that sugar call, I move my stick hand over the pinky switch. We're actually going to override the FCS in this turn to get a little bit more performance out of the jet. So, here we go. 1.5 miles MRT. 1 mile, Mark 350. Alright, at this point, I'm also getting ready to chuck it into burners. We throw the afterburners on, full gates, stage 3 afterburners, at half a mile. And we're going to give Brother Leb a radio call at that point that we're going into burners as well. And the radio call is burners now. I start that at about 0.7 miles. So I'm watching the mile marker. I'm looking at 0.7, burr, 0.6, ners, and 0.5 now, meaning that I'm going into burners. At which point, there's going to be a little bit of lift from the jet because of the fact that we're at 2.3 alpha. When the burners come in, it actually propels our jet upward. So we're going to have to put in a little bit of drive or a little forward on the stick to keep the jet straight and level at 300 feet. At which point, we're going to call ready, hit it, and at this point, we roll 90 degrees to the left and pull almost as hard as you can. Not quite, because if you pull as hard as you can, you actually bleed off too much speed because we are trying to get back to 350 knots to go around the corner. So it's burners now at 0.5 miles, then ready, hit it, trying to roll 90 degrees left, start our roll 90 degrees left at center point. And then we pull for all we're worth, trying to bleed off speed down to around 350 knots to maintain decent speed around the corner. Now we are going to be pulling past the recommended 7.5 G maximum for the F-18C Hornet, and this is one of those moments where the benefits of flying in DCS are able to shine through for us, because rather than limiting the jet to 7.5 G around the corner, which is what they're limited to in the actual show, we in DCS are able to pull well past that and do a true minimum radius turn. So the actual maximum performance of the F-18C Hornet if it were in a dogfight scenario. So that's why we're engaging the paddle and pulling well past 7.5 Gs. But if you'd like to mimic the real guys when they do it, just pull 7.5 Gs and come out of burner about halfway around the corner. This will give you enough time and enough speed to bleed back that power and get back to 350 knots before you chuck it back into burner to come in front of the crowd again and pull around. So let's see how we do here. Burners now. Ready, hit it! 90,
Flight control.
pull, keep
Flight
pulling,
control.
and then start easing the speed. 350 knots there. And right about here, I'm going to start looking for center point again. Because when we're about 45 degrees from center point, that's when we're going to pull as hard as we can until we reach crowd line heading. At which point, it is full back and right stick and full right rudder to squat the jet and pivot it so that it's sitting on its tail. Now, the challenge here is when we do that pivot, at about halfway through that maneuver, and you'll have to just learn this by practice, but about halfway through that maneuver, we have to switch to full left rudder to make sure that the jet doesn't over-roll and face back towards the crowd. We don't want to be in a right bank when we're going up the hill. So the idea here is that we are giving the crowd a nice view of the jet, so a little bit of angle on the jet, so we're not actually perpendicular with crowd line when we roll out of this. We're facing away from the crowd a little bit. And we want to be nose high, and you'll be able to feel when the jet performs this. There's not really a number. It's based upon speed and alpha. But you want to pull the jet until it squats and it starts to get a little lazy, at which point it's full left rudder, a little bit of left stick to keep it from overrolling as well, and then we're keeping the power in for just a couple of seconds before we start pushing out. But I'll talk that over in a second. So here we go. And pulling, kicking. There we go. And right here, so here we go. We are now set up nose high at a good nose high attitude, just above 45 degrees for this particular pass. And we want the jet to get settled. We want to see this velocity indicator start to creep back up. And once the jet feels settled in the sky and feels like it's actually, flying under its own weight, it's got good lift, at which point we push the stick all the way forward, and then we wait for the jet to bite on that all the way forward. You'll be able to feel this as well. The jet will get a little bit floppy, but we want it to be biting in the air. And once it starts biting in the air, that's when we turn our flaps to full. This is a DCS hack. It's required to do this maneuver. They don't actually do it in the real jet, but we slam our flaps to full. That sets our flaps down as far as they go, which helps the jet do the turbo nose low maneuver a lot faster. Without that, the FCS tries to override and keep the jet from having too many negative G, but this flaps to full defeats that FCS limitation and allows us to pull a significant amount of negative G to get ourselves back to level. Now, we don't actually get back to level. We're actually going to end up a little bit nose down, and that's because we're trying to get the velocity vector to be level rather than the watermark. So, when we are a little bit nose down, and this is, once again, something you're going to have to practice, something you're going to have to do by feel, but once you are a little bit nose down, it's flaps auto, a little bit of pull to get the jet's nose back to level, at which point we'll put the burners back into mill, and we're going to roll back to the right and pull back behind the crowd. Now, I give Leb a lot of sugar calls around the corner, and you'll hear that in the demo, but the sugar call I give at this point when I start pushing is Chariot's pushing out. And then when I go level, it's Chariot's leveling out, coming right, comes the pull. That's when we level out, bank to the right 90 degrees, and start pulling around the corner to get to the behind the crowd heading. So here we go. Chariot's pushing out. Leveling out. Coming right. Comes the pull. At which point, trying to get back to nose level. Easing the pull. Rolling out. Smoke on. Smoke off. 320. Ease and power. So we smoked on and smoked off after we rolled out, and that's to give the diamond an indication of where our jets are. This maneuver does not end up being in precisely the same spot every single time, like all the other maneuvers. But Boss needs to understand where we are in the sky, so we give him smoke so that he understands where both of our jets are. So it's smoke on, smoke off, then you call your speed, and you start easing power to go behind the crowd for the opposing MRT. To demonstrate the minimum radius turn, I want to take you back to a show we did in Kobuleti a couple of months ago. While this is by no means perfect, and we've made some adjustments to make it more accurate that we are teaching you in the walkthrough, we still believe this is a fairly representative pass.
Radius circling 5 miles for the MRT. And Chariot's turning in 5 miles for the MRT. Four miles, Mark 353. Three miles, Mark 352. Two miles, Mark 350. 1.5 miles, MRT. 1 mile, Mark 351. Burners now. Ready, hit it. Good entry.
Right controlled. Right controlled.
Ease in the pull. Pulling. Kicking. Chariot's pushing out. Leveling out 1600, coming right. Comes the pull. Easing a little power. Easing the pull and rolling out. Smoke on. Smoke off. Chariot's clear. 340.
Web. Contact.
355.
And that's how the Legacy Blue Solos performed the minimum radius turn. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel where you can find full side-by-side show sequences and debriefs. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the flight line.